in East Asia. I would like to thank you, Professor Yunin Jin, for organizing such an important and maybe new style of webinar, web seminar, which is, I think, very inspiring for the academia. Okay, I would like to encourage all of you to turn your camera on. I think it's, even though it's online, I think it's still face-to-face encounter, okay? We have three exciting presentation today by, of course, very young and fresh scholars. And I think all of this presentation could be inspiring for many sociologists. I'm gonna run the session in the following manner. That is, I will give 25 minutes for each presenter, not to exceed 30 minutes, okay? So 25 minutes, and then the first presentation will be followed by quick comments or question, okay? And then we go on to the next one and the same format. And at the end of the three presentations, we will hear from Professor Shin Eun-kyung, rising star in the field of sociology, especially. Yeah. So, and then this will be followed by some questions and comments from the floor, or maybe all of you from the audiences. And then we'll hear some responses from each presenter, okay? So let's first welcome the first presenter from University of Chicago. How do you pronounce your name? Is it Inayon or Ine-yun? Please, where are you?
Okay. Neon.
Neon, okay.
Yes.
Okay, I learned that you are, you just had received your PhD, right?
Yes.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, the podium is yours. Let's give her a big hand.
Okay, can I share my screen?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Lee, yeah. And during the presentation, please control your mic, disabilize your mic, please.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Nayeon Lee. I'm a recent PhD from the University of Chicago. It's a great pleasure to be here today in this international conference. I learned a lot throughout the two-day conference. I'm really excited to have Professor Gracia Liufer on the panel as well. Her presentation also kind of is related to what I'm talking about today. So I could probably just relay it to her presentation if you were earlier in the morning session. I can skip part of my stuff, I believe. And let's get started. So the title of my presentation today is Dual Nationality as a Tool for Managing Human Resources in Korea. It's a chapter from my dissertation. And it's, it's a large chapter. I try to trim it down to fit into a 15 or 20-minute presentation. So raise your hands if you have any questions, and I'll be glad to talk more about it in the Q&A. So here's the brief plan of the presentation today. I will first start talking about Korea's demographic crises, and then talk about how Korea has introduced a selective dual nationality policy based on two axes. The first one is the geopolitical and economic interest, which leads to preferential treatment of Korean Americans in the dual nationality system, and also the highly skilled. And then I will talk about the second axis, which is the symbolic interest. So Korean selective dual nationality system also has this goal of strengthening ethnic national identity and also boosting fertility. So that's the plan of the presentation. And my presentation begins with a sociological question: who belongs to the nation? So how do countries define state membership, and how important is ethnicity or descent when we define someone's membership as a national member? And the empirical puzzle here is, how did Korea switch from a one nationality only policy to a selective dual nationality policy in 2010? Just to give you a brief preview of my main argument is that we should look at dual citizenship policy as part of a larger citizenship and immigration system based on two axes, so political economy and identity. And the second major argument here is that I'm looking at dual citizenship as a measure for administering a wider range of human resources, not just immigrants and emigrants, but also resident and non-resident citizens, based on both material and symbolic state interests. So just to go briefly through the lit review, I know everybody's interested in migration in this conference, so I can just briefly go through this. The major pitfalls in the literature is that the literature often overlooks the process of selecting worthy candidates for dual citizenship. In other words, who is what, so defining who is what. A lot of the literature talks about as if there are already clear-cut categories of immigrants or diaspora or immigrants, but each of these categories are structured in different ways in different states. And states often favor business elites or those in advanced economies for economic reasons or other political reasons. So we should think about how the process of selection works here, even for dual citizenship. And then another problem that we have in the current literature is that there is a dualistic or a binary distinction between sending and receiving states. Korea is actually a country that has the simultaneous process of having a large out-migration of Koreans to other countries, while we're also receiving a lot of migrants entering the country. So we should have a holistic approach to understand how the simultaneous process of migration happens. And also, we should also think about how countries of mass emigration struggles to incorporate overseas population. Think about Mexico, how many people are living overseas, but they're also sending their remittances back to Mexican economy. So a lot of the literature is based on receiving states. So we often forget to think about the countries with mass emigration. We also forget to talk about the role of resident citizens or plural citizens. We also forget to talk about that, so dual citizenship also creates inequality among resident citizens. Mononationals and plural nationals. If you have read David Fitzgerald's works, he talks about citizenship a la carte. So citizens such as Mexicans living in US doesn't have to do all the duties of citizens because of the simple fact that they're not there. So you can also talk about resident citizens versus non-resident citizens. This gets left out in the literature a lot. So just to go briefly on the data method, I did a field research in Korea. I did our archival data collection. I also did interviews. So just now let me get started on the system of legal citizenship in Korea. So Korea has switched from a one nationality only policy to a dual nationality in 2010, but this is only for selected groups. So Korea's legal system of citizenship is by descent only, so transmission of citizenship is by blood, but there are also naturalizations occurring at the moment, but in principle, it's by descent only, and everyone must choose only one nationality except for selected groups. And I believe this one nationality only policy is what Japan is based on right now. If you were here yesterday, you also had Professor Kondo's presentation. So unlike Japan, Korea has switched to this selective dual nationality policy in 2010. I'm trying to figure out why that happened. So here's a demographic map of Koreans across the globe. This is from 2011, so I'm going to give you the updated statistics in the next slide. But you can see here, there are roughly 7 million Koreans living overseas. Korea's total population today is about 50 million. So about 1/7 of the Korean population is living, or comparably speaking, you could say 1/7 of the total population in Korea is living overseas. You see the two largest groups are in US and China. and third largest group is in Japan. In the morning session, we had a presenter talking about Koreans in Australia. You can see it down below. Moving on, here I give you the demographic landscape of Korea. So the large overseas population is amounting to 7.2 million. In 2019, we have 2.5 million Koreans living in US, 2.4 million of Koreans living in China. So those are the two largest groups. And we also have roughly 167,000 overseas Korean adoptees living across the globe. And Korea is a country that's also receiving a lot of labor migrants and marriage migrants. At this moment in 2019, foreign residents account for as many as 5% of the total population. So if you think about it, it's roughly 2.5 million. We also have labor migrants who are both co-ethnic, so ethnic Koreans coming to Korea to work as labor migrants, and also non-Korean labor migrants. We have a lot of marriage migrants. Marriage migrants, you could also see ethnically Korean marriage migrants and non-ethnically Korean migrants. Moving to the next slide, we're currently facing a really low fertility crisis. So the total fertility rate is well below 1.0. And an aging population, 15.5% of the total population in Korea in 2019 are over age 65. So the conclusion is that we have a shortage in labor, and particularly a serious shortage in skilled labor. I didn't have the time to put in the graphs here, but if you're talking about nationality statistics, we have a net loss of Korean citizens. So more loss of Korean citizens compared to the newly minted citizens. So less naturalization cases compared to people who are giving up Korean citizenship. And then we have a constant outflow of high-skilled Koreans. A lot of college-educated Koreans study abroad and they never return. So we have a brain drain situation. But as Professor Gracia Liu Ferrer's earlier presentation had shown you in the case of Japan, where they have a deficit in skilled labor, but the system is geared towards short use, temporary, semi-skilled workers. So the same situation in Korea. So Korea fails to recruit skilled workers from overseas because the labor migration policies are mostly structured around the needs of semi or less skilled laborers for short-term use. So you see this mismatch, and Korea is facing with this demographic crisis. And here, well, I don't have time to go through this, but this is the way Korea is dealing with the situation right now through both the dual nationality policy at the very end, the bottom of the table, and also overseas Korean policies. In the chapter, I also talk about overseas Korean policies a little bit, but I don't have time to talk about it in this presentation. But you can see that it's going hand in hand. The policies are evolving at the same time. So in 2010, Korea has introduced a selective dual citizenship policy. And just to give you a short breakdown, you can see two categories here, Koreans and non-Koreans. So the only two categories that a non-Korean can apply and become a dual citizen is either by becoming a high-skilled migrant or by being a marriage migrant. And the other categories, the three categories here, are all for ethnic Koreans or people of Korean descent. So dual nationals by birth, so people who are either Korean Americans or persons born with multiple citizenship, and people who are returning migrants over the age 65, such as Korean Americans who are retiring back to Korea. We also had a case we heard in the earlier presentation, hearing about Australians, well, Koreans living in Australia wanting to retire in Korea. So that kind of situation here. And Korean adoptees overseas. So these are the three categories that are exclusively for Koreans. And then you can see high skilled and the marriage migrants categories are open to both. So just to go back to my original plan of the presentation, these are the two axes that I'm going to talk about. in terms of discussing dual citizenship as a larger tool for managing a wide range of human resources. So the first axis, geopolitical and economic interests. I'm going to talk about how dual citizenship is used to recruit and retain the highly skilled, and also how it's used to favorably treat Korean Americans over ethnic Koreans in China and CIS countries, so former Soviet Union countries. And then the second axis is symbol interest and how the Korean state uses strengthening ethnic national identity and boosting fertility as an excuse to extend dual nationality to groups that you would think these groups have less economic value, but why is the state extending dual nationality to these groups? So I'll talk about them in the later section of the presentation. So the first axis, geopolitical and economic interests. I will first talk about how dual nationality is extended to the highly skilled. So as you've seen in the earlier slides, Korea has this demographic deficit and we have a great need for high skilled workers. So if you're a high skilled worker and you apply to naturalize through this category called special naturalization, there is no residency requirement. You don't have to have lived in Korea for 5 years to naturalize. If you're a highly skilled worker and you get the reviews done, you can become a Korean citizen and you can also maintain your dual citizenship. So this was intended for the global talent, so people with highly specialized skills. But what's interesting here is that the hidden focus was for recruiting high-skilled, particularly among Korean Americans. Here is an excerpt from an interview of the director of President's Commission for National Competitiveness, PCNC, Kang Man-soo, in 2009. So this is the commission that had pushed for adopting the selective dual citizenship policy in 2010. And so you can see here, he talks about how, oh, we're gonna have to solve the labor shortage and fertility decline, but without opening doors to anybody, why don't we just think about the overseas Koreans and allow them to come and live in Korea and then give them dual nationality if necessary. And we need to actively recruit these people. So these kinds of thinking or what was inside the bureaucrats' minds, I would say, when they were crafting the dual nationality policy. So their initial focus was on high-skilled workers, but high-skilled workers from a specific co-ethnic group, so to say, Korean Americans. So preferential treatment of ethnic Koreans were also seen in the highly skilled category. So if you want to become a dual citizen through this category, you have to have your papers reviewed, but applicants for this category are predominantly from Korean descent. So it was mostly Koreans applying to become a high-skilled dual citizenship holder. And then because many Korean applicants were complaining that the eligibility requirements were too high for them, they even lowered it by half if you had Korean descent. So even the high skill category was highly structured around the needs of the Koreans. And then even in the other categories, in general, you can see that the dual nationality policy has favorably treated Korean Americans over others. So the important piece here is that ethnic Koreans in China and CIS countries were generally excluded. I will get to the details in the next slide, but just to give you a summary, Koreans in China and CIS countries cannot become dual nationals because they have no South Korean citizenship. And many of these countries, China and many CIS countries, do not allow dual nationality. And the Korean government did not want them to be included in the program for many reasons, such as labor market disruption, and they were worried about diplomatic relations with China. So Korea has a better diplomatic ties with US compared to China and CIS country. So here's the next slide. You can compare the two groups. So Korean Americans are the group who moved to the US, mostly after 1965. The first generation are in their retirement age, so they're wanting to retire back in Korea. Because Republic of Korea was established in 1948, these people are mostly former citizens, so they can restore their Korean citizenship. They can hold overseas Korean visas. They can also be included in the dual nationality system, either through high skilled or either through the returning migrants over the age 65 category. So it's not a problem for them. For the second group, such as ethnic Koreans in China and CIS countries, these are migrants from the pre-colonial and colonial era, so before 1910 or 1935. So they're mostly second generations or in the retirement age, and they're still seeking jobs in Korea. But these people don't have any formal ties, legal ties to the South Korean citizenship. Maybe their parents might, but they don't. So it's really difficult for them to gain legal citizenship. So they have to either come to work in Korea either through work visit visas or overseas Korean visa and permanent residency visas. These latter two visa categories were only recently extended to this group through constitutional court rulings and other processes. So most of the time, ethnic Koreans in China and CS countries had very less favorable situation, even in the co-ethnic policy. So, and of course, they cannot obtain dual nationality. So moving on to the second axis of the dual nationality policy in Korea. So my question here is that why was dual citizenship extended to groups with less visible economic utility? So you can think, oh, high-skilled migrants, they're very valuable. That's why the Korean state is trying to give them dual nationality and trying to recruit them through the dual nationality policy. But there are also other groups in the system that you had already seen that were also extended dual citizenship. So why is that the case? So my finding is that the first reason might be that the Korean state is trying to strengthen its ethnic national identity by giving dual citizenship to Korean migrants who are returning back to Korea over the age 65 and also overseas Korean adoptees. So the first group, Korean migrants over age 65, they're mostly Korean Americans who are trying to retire and now live in Korea after their kids have grown up and they're all gone to their colleges. By allowing them to restore Korean citizenship and become a dual national, the Korean state can lessen its financial burden because Korean migrants can hold on to their social security and pension benefits from other countries. And for overseas Korean adoptees, these people were taken away their legal Korean citizenship, which was not by their choice. So the Korean state is trying to do a corrective measure to mend its past mistakes. And in the older nationality law, if you wanted to restore your Korean citizenship as an adoptee, you had to give up your adopted country's citizenship. But most of these people's lives are entirely based in their current country of residence. So it's difficult for them to restore Korean citizenship. But now, through the 2010 selective dual citizenship policy, overseas Korean adoptees can restore their Korean citizenship and then become a dual national. And another thing that I didn't include here is that most of the times, conscription is a huge issue in South Korean dual citizenship, which I talk about in another paper. But in case of adoptees, this was not an issue for them, but because they're automatically exempt from military service, so this was not an issue. So it was easy for them to include this group. And moving on to the second group, dual nationality is given as a reward for marriage migrants' reproductive contribution to the Korean society. So what dual citizenship policy is doing here is it's basically incentivizing marriage migrants to stay married and procreate. You can see that marriage migrants are included in the system, but they have very tiered access to dual nationality and naturalization, depending on their current marital status and whether or not they have children. So dual nationality is allowed for only current spouses of Korean citizens. So if you're separated, divorced, or widowed, you can't apply. So it's incentivizing marriage migrants to stay married. And then the faster track of naturalization, which has shorter residency requirements, is also only for current spouses and with exceptions allowed for people who are separated, divorced, or widowed. But for the latter group, you have to have additional proof that you're either raising a minor kid from a Korean citizen, or you have to prove that you are not attributable to the dissolution of marriage. So it was not your fault that your spouse left or disappeared or died or divorced. So, but even in this case, you could probably gain access to faster naturalization and become a Korean national, but you still have to give up your original citizenship. So you don't get to have multiple citizenship in this case. So in a way, the selective dual nationality system is incentivizing the marriage migrants to stay married to a Korean spouse and have their children and raise them. So giving you the conclusion here. So through this unique case study of Korea, it's a country with a large diaspora and also a growing population of migrant population. We can build a more comprehensive state-centered approach in studying dual citizenship policies. So my argument here is that we have to look at dual citizenship policy as a measure for administering a wider range of human resources. It's not just a co-ethnic policy or a diaspora policy. If you look at a country such as Korea, which has a large migrant population and also a large overseas population, you have to think about how it works both ways. And I'm also arguing here that the selective dual citizenship policy in Korea has fulfilled both material and symbolic interests of the Korean state. So the material meaning that it had these geopolitical and economic state interests that needed to be met because of the demographic deficit. So it was trying to recruit high-skilled and specific co-ethnic groups such as Korean Americans from advanced economies to be included in their dual nationality policy. But at the same time, it was also extending dual citizenship to groups that you would think has less visible economic utility. And the reason was that it was trying to strengthen its ethnic national identity, but also boost fertility by incentivizing the marriage migrants to stay married and have children. And my final conclusion would be that we need to have a holistic approach to dual citizenship policy and look at it as a part of a larger citizenship and immigration system based on the two axes of political economy and identity. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments and queries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have any quick question or comment, please. So look like Gracie. Okay, you give a hand, right? Anyone have a quick question to clarify the presentation? Okay, Jin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Professor Kondo, you can.
May I?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask about the concept of boosting fertility. This is quite new for me, and maybe first questions, are there any such kind of advantage argument in US or other countries? Maybe Korean selective policies for dual citizenship is accepting marriage migrants. That's why boosting fertility is maybe connected to these selective policies. But I want to clarify, if the foreign spouse having a child, such spouses are admitted to get the double citizenship, or if foreign spouse doesn't have a child, they can apply double citizenship. May I ask?
Yeah, please go ahead, Dr. Lee.
So I will clarify on that. So you have to have, you have to be married at this point to apply for dual citizenship. So having children is not necessary at the point, but the whole point is trying to have people stay married, not get divorced. So that's what I meant by boosting fertility. Yeah.
Okay.
And are there any other argument in other countries?
So maybe for that question,
not only in South Korea, but also US or other countries, are there such kind of argument in?
Go ahead,
Can I respond? Yeah,
Yeah.
I will just briefly respond. I haven't really looked at the citizenship policies in other countries and how that ties to this, but there is a academic term called reproductive citizenship. So I think this is something that's really frequently talked about in the literature. And I also talk about how this is sort of similar to conscription policies. So in my larger dissertation, I talk about how the French conscription policy was geared towards having children. So if you're a father of I don't know how many children, then the French military didn't want you to go to the military. So this is something similar to the conscription system, only that I'm talking about dual citizenship here. But you can see these sorts of boosting fertility themes throughout state policies in other countries as well.
Okay, if you have further questions or more complicated questions, please save these questions for the last minute. That is after the presentation, we'll have more intense discussion. Okay, let's move on to the second presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. We'll hear from Hwajin Shin Hwajin from Korea University. Hwajin Shin, you're here, right?
Yes.
Shin Hwajin.
안녕하세요.
Okay.
Hi.
So share your present material, if you will. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Kim, for the introduction. And also, I'd like to thank my advisor, Professor Yoon, for the opportunity to present my research today. So I'm a PhD candidate in sociology department, and today I'll be presenting a chapter from my dissertation project, which is on North Korean refugees living in London. So just to give a brief overview of my field work, which took last year for 5 months. I stayed in London last year, luckily, way before the COVID crisis, and carried out one-on-one survey with North Korean refugees. The central motive of my survey was to collect the social network data of North Koreans, and I ended up surveying 141 participants, followed by 33 in-depth interviews. So I'm going to, this is like first time trying this, so I'm going to share my slide. So I hope everyone can see this. Okay. So I'm going to give a brief overview of how North Koreans are settled in London. So in London, North Koreans live in the area known as New Malden, which is in the southwestern region within London. And it is about 40 to 50-minute train ride away from the central region. So in the beginning, South Korean immigrants settled down in New Malden starting in the 1990s. Then in 2004, North Koreans were first granted refugee status in the UK. And the number increased for about 8 to 10 years until the UK government turned cautious about granting refugee status to North Koreans on the grounds that majority of North Koreans were already granted South Korean citizenship before entering the UK as asylum seekers. So now about 700 North Korean refugees live in New Malden, and this number includes both adults and children under 18. So I think some of the professors have already seen these pictures, but for those who didn't, I'm going to show you some pictures of the area. Just by looking at it, this neighborhood is very typical neighborhood found anywhere in London, very brown, gray, cloudy, and all that. But a special dynamic found in New Malden is that the Korean stores are owned by South Korean immigrants, but the employees are from North Korea. You see Gangnam there, that's a restaurant famous for supposedly Korean chicken. And the interesting dynamic is that the restaurant is owned by a South Korean immigrant. The chefs are a North Korean and a Korean Chinese, and all waitresses were from North Korea. And the second picture is the picture of H Mart in London. As many of you know, H Mart is a Korean-owned grocery chain, which is usually found in North America. And North Korean men work here as drivers or frontline grocery workers. And North Korean women are also employed as workers, cashiers, as well as they call it chef, but they work in the kitchen making Korean side dishes sold in the store. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is another street view. It's been about like 16 years since the initial settlement, and like many other first-generation immigrants, some North Koreans are becoming self-employed. North Korean brothers took over one of the restaurants shown in the picture from a South Korean immigrant, and I heard it's quite a lucrative business now. Here's another street view, and this is actually the last picture, and this is the typical look of the houses found in New Malden. So the actual research goal of this research is to incorporate social network analysis to the study of migrant integration. And I aim to emphasize the significance of network structure in migrant experiences above and beyond individual level characteristics such as age, gender, or employment status. And the second goal is to highlight the unique role of trust in ethnic networks, which is usually assumed than explicitly explored. So I'm going to like zip through the theoretical network framework, because I'm sure everyone is familiar with like social capital and all that. So the significance of relational resource for migrant integration is little questioned. First, from departure to settlement, social networks span the entire process of migration. And also social ties are closely related to their survival and mobility. That bonding ties to co-ethnic friends and family provide material and emotional support, and bridging or non-overlapping ties to natives in the host country give access to opportunities, new information, and mobility. So in most instances, ethnic ties are increasingly considered as isolation and social impasse, whereas bridging ties to natives are associated with mobility and successful integration. And as a result, research and policy mostly come to emphasize migrants' need to form social bridges outside of the immediate network of family and in-group communities. So in a nutshell, co-ethnic ties are losing much significance beyond the initial settlement. And I argue that the perceived limitations of the ethnic solidarity stem from the tradition of equating in-group trust among migrants to emotional closeness. So therefore, by paying attention to the unique role of trust and interpersonal ties among migrants, I aim to highlight the significance of ethnic community in actually facilitating social participation. So first, interpersonal trust is defined as placing confidence, and it alters benevolence, honesty, predictability, and dependability. And the trust is known to reduce fears and feelings of vulnerability. And also the core of social capital, trust is at the core of social capital and resource exchange, that the lack of trust is responsible for hindering the flow of information and resources. And also in social exchange theory traditions, trust and affect are treated as independent processes in social relationships, where trust is considered as a rationality that reduces risk and uncertainty, whereas affect is known to reinforce repeated interactions by positive emotions serving as an internal stimuli. So given the context of uncertainty in which some immigrant groups and refugees are placed, I argue that the restoration of trust among co-ethnics serve as a foundation for facilitating their integration. So research questions are as follows. So trust in whom matters in migrant integration. Should bridging ties to outgroup members occur at the expense of strong ties to co-ethnics? And the second question is, does the position as a broker in ethnic trust network facilitate social participation of refugees? So during my field work, I carried out one-on-one interviews with North Korean refugees, again, and asylum seekers who are over 18. And data on 5 interviewees were dropped for analysis. So the data is based on 136 participants. The survey questions include very extensive questions on their personal networks. And it took about like 2 hours per person, I think. And also other questions include integration experiences in the United Kingdom and basic social demographic information. And for sampling, I adopted a strategy called respondent-driven sampling, which is used to study so-called hard-to-reach population, such as HIV patients, terrorists, and drug addicts. Defining feature of hard-to-reach population is that they lack sampling frame, they are hard to contact, and only those who maintain active membership in the group can identify and contact other members, and they are vulnerable to prejudice, stigma, and risk. So there, RDS is very similar to snowball sampling, but very specific rules and caveats are involved. And one of the defining conditions of RDS is that the chain of referral has to become very long, as shown in this slide. So this person right here is a seed, and as you can see, the chain of referral got as long as up to the wave 13. So for the time being, I'm not going to like dig too much deep into details, but these are just some brief overviews. So then if you are interested, I included a reference here. And this is a book called Applying Respondent-Driven Sampling to Migrant Population. And it's an excellent source for applying RDS to your migration research. And as I briefly mentioned in the beginning, I use social network analysis to understand the extent to which structured position within social networks predict social participation. And social network analysis provides a meso-level analysis by considering integration as a function of individual attributes and social embeddedness. And for statistical analysis, I used linear regression. So, and also, I don't want to like confuse the audience with too much social network terms. And I personally don't identify myself as a network scientist, so I want to keep this as intuitive as possible. So the network measures I use in the analysis are betweenness centrality, out-degree centrality, and in-degree centrality. First, betweenness centrality measures how much an individual occupies central positions where they bridge otherwise disconnected alters in the network. So conceptually speaking, migrants with higher betweenness have more diverse people linked through them, are able to control flows of information and resource exchange, and are positioned to influence other members in the network. And out-degree centrality is, as you can see, this is a diagram, is this measures how many nominations made by respondents, and this is can be seen as a measure of how sociable this person is. And in-degree centrality measures nomination received by the participant, which is a measure of popularity. Other covariates independent variables used in analysis are respondent background, organizational participation, and acculturation. And I mentioned dependent variable is social participation, and in particular, so dependent variables are divided into outgroup contacts, brokerage, and generalized trust in members of the host country. So I would just want to emphasize one point for brokerage here. So negative brokerage means more brokerage or non-overlapping ties. So in a nutshell, negative, the better, I guess. So I'll explain more in the findings. And this is a visualization of the social network data I collected. And this is a affect network. And the next is a trust network. And there's a considerable overlap between the two, but you can like sort of see that the trust network is less denser than the affect network. For simplicity, this is the first part of the findings. And for simplicity, I only included independent variables on network terms and those that are found significant for the presentation. The first analysis explores the association between network position in the affect network and the probability of social participation. And as you can see, network variables are not statistically significant, meaning that the network position in the affect network does not significantly predict social participation of refugees. But other individual level variables are significant for brokerage that migrants are able to form more brokerage as years of residence increase, experience PTSD, and participate in school-related organization. And the next second analysis explores the association between network position in the trust network and the probability of social participation. So in contrast from the first analysis, betweenness measure is significantly related to dependent variables on social participation. As you can see, higher betweenness is associated with more outgroup contact, having more brokerage, and having a higher level of generalized trust. Also, the same individual level variables are found significant. So as initially hypothesized, it is affirmed that trust has a unique role and that emotional support, sense of stable identity, and self-esteem, possibly coming from co-ethnic trust, act as a foundation for furthering social participation.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
Is the brokerage means the outgroup contact is the ego's answer, right? How many you pointed about, right?
Actually, this is a network measure. So this is something BERT created. So it's not intuitively graspable, but so negative value means having more brokerage. So it should be actually
more brokerage in your network.
Yes.
So the other person is likely to be brokerage. That's what you're saying.
Actually, this is a brokerage with actually, this brokerage measure comes from personal network. So this is not a brokerage measure in terms of the network within the among North Koreans. This is a brokerage encompassing the entire personal network of individuals, meaning that it includes like other like South Korean contacts, like native contacts. So having more brokerage means that this person has more outside contact, I guess, but non-overlapping way.
Okay.
I hope this is intuitive.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. So moving on. So then the next question then is, who is more likely to be central in the trust network? So the next set of analysis moves on to demonstrate that migrants' willingness to trust and be trusted within the ethnic community is more than personal dispositions, and that it is related to individual social characteristics. So this is kind of small, but as you can see, higher betweenness and ethnic trust network is associated with being married, having kin in the host country, being employed full-time, and participation in organizations like ethnic group, school-related organizations and hometown organizations. And also having a kin in North Korea are lower in betweenness in the trust network. So, and among these variables, I would like to emphasize the significance of variables related to family. So provided that trust reduces anxiety in certain uncertain situations, refugees experience security and control by the presence, or I can say the symbolic representation of family in the destination. So at the same time, those without family in the destination stay more marginal within the ethnic trust network, suggesting that they are less likely to experience social integration. The next figure shows a similar implication that as the number of kin living in the UK increases, the betweenness score increases. So to summarize the findings suggest that migrant structural position within the social networks predict integration above and beyond individual level characteristics and immediate network connections. Second, the findings highlight the primacy of ethnic community, that co-ethnic trust acts as a foundation for social participation. And in future research, integration should be considered as maintaining a balance between social connections from home and host societies. And lastly, refugees or other vulnerable immigrants like undocumented immigrants or those in poverty are known to actually challenged in forming trust. So future policy and research should consider circumstances under which migrants are able to form in-group community grounded in trust. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So I'm glad that you made the data, collect data, because it was before the pandemic, right?
Yes, I was very
Okay,
lucky.
that's good, yeah. Just quick question from me, that is, what is the legal status of these North Korean refugees?
Again, pardon?
What is the legal status of these refugees from North Korea?
Oh, actually, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but a lot of them actually gained, now have green card, and they have also acquired citizenship. And a good portion of them maintain legal status as refugees.
Refugees. And some
A
of
very,
them
yes, a
attain
very small,
citizenship, yeah.
yes, and a very small proportion of them are asylum seekers. So, which
Okay.
means they don't have legal status yet.
Okay. Any quick question to clarify the presentation? Quick comments, quick question, brief one. Okay. We will have more intense discussion at the end. In the end. Now, finally, we have Kim Eun-jae from Korean University. Please. Eun-jae Kim, yeah.
Sure, 1 second. I'm trying to share my screen. Okay. Okay, great. So I'm Eun-jae, and I'm a doctoral student in sociology at Korea University, and I'll be presenting the state of migrant integration in Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, review of policy and empirical research. In this study, we examine a level of migrant integration in each country through the case of migrant workers and female marriage migrants. Before we dive in, I'd like to introduce the largest structure of this study. This is part of a largest research project on migrant integration and multiculturalism in Northeast Asia conducted by Professor Jin Yoon. This study consists of 3 parts. First, we reviewed laws and policies, government publications and statistics, and the existing academic research to lay theoretical and empirical backgrounds. Then we conducted surveys of migrant workers and female marriage migrants to examine their actual experiences. And we also collected survey responses from experts. So literature review, surveys of migrant workers and marriage migrants, and surveys of experts become three major components of this data, so we could observe any trends or discrepancy among them. To examine a level of integration, we use multicultural migrant integration model conceived by Jin Yoon. It has 5 core domains: foundation, facilitators, social connections, markers and means, and psychosocial domains. The original model by Ager and Strang has only 4 dimensions, but Yoon added a psychosocial domain. He argued psychosocial integration can draw a more complete picture of multicultural integration because it tells whether migrants' identity can be respected or not, which ultimately leads to social inclusion. Put differently, Yoon insisted both physical and psychosocial dimensions are fundamental to migrant integration. For each core domain and index, I'll walk you all through after introducing data and method. So we use a variety of sources of data to investigate integration of migrants in these countries, including international survey and research projects, such as World Value Survey, Human Rights Report, and UN Convention, and also national laws and policies, government research projects, and empirical studies. This set of data allows us to examine integration in a national and community level so we could compare structural support for migrant integration. We are also still in the process of gathering data, so this result can change after. We particularly focused on and low-skilled migrant workers and female marriage migrants because these 2 groups are representative and common in all 3 countries. Based on this data, we evaluated the level of integration by using a 5-point Likert scale on a basis of presence or absence of laws and policies, facilitating migrant integration and literature review of existing empirical research. In a scale of 5, 1 refers to critically unfavorable and 5 indicates favorable. And this is our first group, migrant workers. As mentioned earlier, we have 5 core domains, and I am going to introduce each in detail and share our evaluation. First, we have foundation. It means if migrants have rights as a citizen. It asks migrants' legal rights, eligibility, and isness of obtaining citizenship and permanent residency. And this is our evaluation. The integration index of all 3 countries are pretty low, but Korea scored higher, slightly unfavorable. All 3 countries do not have any laws or policies that restrict migrants to apply or be eligible for both citizenship and permanent residency. However, for Korea, under employment permit system, migrant workers technically can stay up to almost 10 years, but only few migrants can benefit from this policy. In many cases, migrant workers can only stay for 4 years and 10 months, which is 2 months short from 5 years of continued residency. Korea asks migrant workers to leave country before they complete 5 years, which opens a way to apply for citizenship or permanent residency, then come back after 3 months to renew their visa. For Japan and Taiwan, rules are pretty much the same. Legally, they may qualify for length of residency, but as a technical intern in case of Japan and worker under employment permit system in Taiwan, their days of stay are not counted as continued residency. For instance, if you worked in Japan as a technical intern for 5 years, when you try to apply for citizenship, your legal days of stay is 0. So it means Korea allows very few migrant workers to apply for citizenship or permanent residency, but Japan and Taiwan do not even give it a chance.
Oh, actually,
next we have
about the integration index. Can you go back to the slide? For the
which one?
Integration index. Do you use it for the social integration index in the World Value Survey, or is it integration between the citizens and immigrants? The integration index in at the bottom.
Oh, at the bottom.
Yeah.
Oh, so what we did is here are the questionnaires we try to find answers from. So if with the data we found and we match this data to the questions, and if we see these policies or laws are favorable toward immigrants, we evaluated 5, and if it's hostile, we evaluate 1.
Also, you guys actually compute the index.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. Okay. So, okay. Okay, and next we have facilitators. It has 2 parts: language and cultural knowledge, and safety and stability. The first part, language and cultural knowledge, is about language and culture. Language fluency basically asks their language skills and opportunities to learn language and supports offered by governments. And cultural knowledge also seeks if immigrants are well informed for law, policy, customs, and other information to maintain their daily life. Safety and stability concern any type of discrimination migrants may face in a host country. Safety asks frequencies of discrimination in everyday life and laws and policies to protect migrants against discrimination. Stability is for structural level. It oversees laws, policy-wise aspects of discrimination. It asks if a host country legally grants equal access to opportunity to migrants. For language and cultural knowledge, Korea scored slightly unfavorable, lower than the 2 countries, halfway favorable. This is because of the difference of hours of language training. All migrants in 3 countries complained their language deficiency and language-related difficulties in workplace. However, Japan and Taiwan provided more hours of language training. Korea only provide 40 hours of training, whereas Japan and Taiwan offers more than 200 hours. For cultural knowledge, we only have fragment of data for each country, so it was not possible to evaluate at the moment. Once again, Korea scored critically unfavorable than the 2 countries, slightly unfavorable in safety and stability index. Migrants in all 3 countries experience prevalent discrimination, but Japan and Taiwan have at least enacted anti-discrimination policy, which Korea has kept failing. And of course, anti-discrimination policy in 2 countries may not have strong legal enforcement. It still tells that Japan and Taiwan show they legally acknowledge discrimination in their country. So for facilitators domain, Korea scored 1.5, while Japan and Taiwan won 2.5. 3 countries are still in unfavorable, but Japan and Taiwan is leaning more toward halfway favorable. Our next domain is social connection. Social connection consists of 3 parts: social bridges, social bonds, and social links. Social bridges indicates a level of integration among migrants and non-migrants, for example, Koreans, natives. Social bonds is about interaction within migrants and migrant community, and social links ask government support for immigrant adjustment. All 3 countries scored 2 slightly unfavorable in social bridges. Migrant workers in 3 countries do not occasionally interact with non-migrants, and usually around 20% of migrants interact with non-migrants daily. And instead, migrants interact more actively with other migrants. They scored slightly favorable. And they are mostly friends with one another, and they exchange material, social, and emotional mutual support. For government support for adjustment, Japan scored lower, slightly unfavorable than Korea, and Taiwan halfway favorable. Both Korea and Taiwan operate government agencies to support migrant workers. In case of Korea, community organizations also actively advocate migrant workers' rights. However, Japan does not have official institution to support migrant workers' adjustment, so it only won 2, slightly unfavorable. In total, Korea and Taiwan scored 3, halfway favorable, and Japan scored 2.6, slightly lower in social connection domain. Markers and means have 2 parts: system and structure, and value and ideology. System and structure consists of employment, which includes things like labor force, participation rate, income, etc. And housing has types of housing, home ownership rates, and stability and environment. Education refers to education rights. Health means health rights and health status. And political participation includes voting rights and running for an election and public offices. Then we have value and ideology. Sense of belonging measures if migrants feel they belong to local community and a country, and whether non-migrants also see migrants as a member of society. Sense of trust indicates if migrants see they are recognized as an equal and competent member of immigrants as an equal. Sorry, my series. Sorry about that. And sense of trust indicates if migrants see they are recognized as an equal and competent members of society, and whether non-migrant recognize migrants as an equal and competent member of society. And lastly, multicultural acceptance illustrate, sorry for the technical issue. Lastly, multicultural acceptance illustrates if government supports any type of multicultural events that support immigrant language, culture, and identity. And it also examines whether there's any immigrant-oriented or operated media and press. So for employment, there's a huge difference between Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. Japan scored 1, which indicates critically unfavorable. Korea and Taiwan employ employment permit system and grant migrant workers legal rights as a worker. However, Japan employ technical intern system, which does not treat migrant workers as a worker. They are whether a student or even a trainee who came to Japan to get industrial training. Therefore, technical interns do not get what they deserve as a worker. They get paid less and are not protected by labor law. All migrant workers in 3 countries work more, paid less, and get discriminated, but technical interns in Japan have less rights, so they therefore are less protected by law. Migrant workers in Taiwan have better housing situations and environment, halfway favorable than Korea and Japan. For Korea and Japan, workers mostly live in a low-quality housing offered by company. Yet in case of Taiwan, brokering agency offer housing in many cases, and migrant workers express satisfaction. For education, Korea and Japan scores 3, halfway favorable, while Taiwan scored 2, slightly unfavorable. Korea and Japan provide various education, including language, vocational adjustment, and even vocational training in response to their return to home country. Yet Taiwan does not have comprehensive education like Korea and Japan. We also evaluated education right for children of immigrants. All 3 countries do not make education compulsory for them, but of course they can enroll in school, but it's mostly up to principals. So for example, in Korea, if some immigrant children are rejected by principals of school to enroll, so they left out. For health, integration index of Taiwan indicates slightly favorable, while Korea and Japan show slightly unfavorable. Korea and Japan both legally require workers to be insured, but many of them are uninsured due to poor financial stability of their employers. Also, they exhibit poor health. However, in case of Taiwan, many of them are insured and regularly checked up. Therefore, a lot of them have good health. For political participation, all countries scored 1, be critically unfavorable because they don't have any legal voting rights. All 3 countries have slightly unfavorable index for sense of belonging. We weren't able to locate evidence from immigrants, but over 20% of non-immigrants do not want migrants as neighbors. We can infer that non-migrants do not consider migrant workers as a local resident or even a citizen. Sense of trust is worse. All countries show critically unfavorable. We don't have sufficient data to examine this, but non-immigrants in Korea and Japan show very low level of trust toward immigrants, which is less than 20%. However, more Taiwanese trust immigrants than Koreans and Japanese. Their level of trust is more than twice higher than Koreans and Japanese. Lastly, for multicultural acceptance, Taiwan scored slightly favorable, while Korea and Japan show slightly unfavorable. Korea does have cultural events, but mostly assimilative. And for Japan, they do not have government support for cultural events. But Taiwanese government has many multicultural events to support migrant identity and culture. So for markers and means, Taiwan scored highest, 2.5, Korea scored 2, and Japan has 1.7. So for migrant workers, considering all domains, Japan has lowest integration index with 1.9, while Korea scored 2.2 and Taiwan scored 2.3. So we could say a level of integration of 3 countries are slightly unfavorable in general, but Japan is lower than Korea and Taiwan. Female marriage migrants show similar patterns. They scored higher than migrant workers because they are better treated as a mother and a spouse of nationals. However, Japan does not provide comprehensive and wide range of support to integrate marriage migrants. Compared to other migrant groups, marriage migrants are privileged for citizenship and permanent residency. They are a spouse and a mother of nationals, but still they need vouching from husband. And in this context, Korea and Japan show slightly favorable. Taiwan has similar policy, but they discriminate mainland Chinese for political reason, so they scored halfway favorable. For language and cultural knowledge, Korean and Taiwanese government offer many language and cultural programs to support adjustment and integration. So marriage migrants in these two countries are pretty fluent in language and knowledgeable in law and policy and etc. However, marriage migrants in Japan cannot enjoy this kind of support from government. Compared to Korea and Japan, Korea and Taiwan, they are less proficient in Japanese language and less aware of laws and policies and customs and community services. So they have halfway favorable index. Safety and stability show similar patterns with migrant workers. All marriage migrants in 3 countries experience discrimination and domestic violence, but except for Korea, marriage migrants in 2 countries can be protected by law. So while Korea scored critically unfavorable, Japan and Taiwan show slightly unfavorable. For facilitators, Taiwan scored 3, halfway favorable, while Korea and Japan are in between slightly unfavorable and halfway favorable. Marriage migrants demonstrate more active engagement with non-migrants than migrant workers, mostly through parents' meeting. They all scored 3. For social bonds, marriage migrants show pretty tight community among other migrants. They have more chances to interact with one another. However, for Japan, we haven't found appropriate data to examine social bonds. For social links, Japan scored 3, halfway favorable, while others exhibit favorable. Korea and Taiwan offer various programs to educate marriage migrants, language, culture, and provide agencies to support. And both countries have marriage migrant support center and calling services. However, Japanese government has not yet facilitated support for adjustment among marriage migrants. So for social connections, Korea and Taiwan scored 4.3 over slightly favorable, but Japan is only halfway favorable. For employment, Korea and Japan are halfway favorable, while Taiwan is slightly favorable. Marriage migrants in 3 countries participate in labor market with a less secure job, but Taiwan shows slightly higher rates of 70%. And we have housing. For Korea, they have fairly good enough home ownership rate with relatively high satisfaction. But for Japan, we don't have data for housing environment yet, and Taiwan doesn't have home ownership rate just yet. So they score 3, but this can change if we supplement more data. Education. Korea and Taiwan scored 4, while Japan scored 3. Since children of marriage migrants are Korean nationals and citizens, education is compulsory. Also, Korean governments provide a wide range of education for marriage migrants as well, including language and culture, as mentioned earlier. And Taiwan also support marriage migrant education and education for children. But Japan do offer compulsory education for children, but does not provide governmental level of comprehensive education for marriage migrants. Japan scored lowest with health, slightly unfavorable for health. Health data for Japan is insufficient, but they demonstrate pretty high level of depression. And for Korea, most of them are insured and have pretty okay level of self-rated health, but have pretty alarming depression rate. And Taiwan provide good healthcare services, so marriage migrants also maintain their health. For political participation, after obtaining citizenship, marriage migrants gain political rights. We are still gathering more data on this, but while Taiwan allows foreign residents to vote if they satisfy a certain amount of period of residence, but Japan does not. And Korea has relatively easy access to citizenship, which directs voting rights, but has lower voting participation. In this context, although we don't have comparable or standardized data for each country at the moment, based on respective data, we evaluate countries for halfway favorable. All 3 countries have insufficient data to measure sense of belonging. However, inferring from government support, Korea can at least get halfway favorable. For Taiwan, we could observe high level of social distance toward marriage migrants, so we can say they are slightly unfavorable. Sense of trust also have insufficient data, but Japan has lower score with slightly unfavorable because more Japanese are opposed to international marriage, and level of trust in Korea and Taiwan is both in 2s out of 5. Lastly, for multicultural acceptance, all 3 countries scored 2. Korea and Taiwan has too many assimilative government-sponsored events, but Japan does not even have one from government. Korea and Japan scored 3.1 for markers and means, while Japan scored 2.7. And this is mostly due to lack of support from government through law and policy. So the integration index for marriage migrants, Korea scored highest with 3.5, Taiwan scored 3.4, and Japan is below halfway favorable, 2.9. It shows more discernible differences in 3 countries than migrant workers. Oh, sorry. So far we have a lot to digest. So here are key findings of our study. As you can tell from this table, the level of integration of marriage migrants are higher than migrant workers in all countries. South Korean and Taiwanese government put more effort to integrate migrant workers and marriage migrants than Japanese government. For example, marriage migrants are considered as a mother of national and a spouse, so governments employ more assimilative laws and policies. However, migrant workers are rather treated as a sojourner. South Korean and Taiwanese civic and community organizations and migrants' rights advocacy provide more support for migrant workers and marriage migrants. So we can tell these 3 factors, types of immigrants, presence of laws and policy, and civic and community engagements, bring differences in the level of integration of marriage migrants and migrant workers in Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Unje. This is your first time presentation?
It's not my first time actually.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. Unje mentioned in the beginning of this presentation that this research is a part of larger project by Professor Yunin Jin, but I think this presentation itself is immense. And very ambitious. Any quick questions to clarify the presentation materials or presentation? I mean, comparing 3 cases, 3 countries is very ambitious. Any? Yeah, actually okay, Professor Jin, yeah.
Kondo. My name is Kondo. Thank you very much.
Kondo-san. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. May I ask when is survey time? Because I presented yesterday. Since April last year, our situation was changed. Even technical interns has a chance to change the status, and after then they can apply to the permanent residency or apply to the citizenship if they change the status. And also, even before April last year, care workers, if they can enter as a technical interns, but if they pass the national examination, they can accept the status as care workers, and then they can apply to the permanent residency and so on. So when is survey result? When?
Data collection, right?
Yeah.
When did?
Can I answer? We started collecting data since last year, and thank you for the update. And it's not easy for us to collect data from outside of Korea because we have limited access to a lot of information. So that's why we haven't had a chance to update new policies and laws. So thanks to your update, we will definitely update our information regarding law, citizenship and permanent residency for Japan. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Just a quick comment. I think it's very interesting and very ambitious, but the part on the migrant workers, because I don't know about Korea and Taiwan, but Japan is very diverse. So what counts as migrant worker? Technical interns, very special group. And it's just one group of migrant workers. But at the same time, it seems like some of their measures actually measure general immigrant situation, like children of migrants. So in a section on migrant workers, I think it might be tricky. You cannot, equate the migrant technical intern situation at the same time provide policy information that represent the general, migrants. So that's a little bit kind of disjuncture there. So that's just something in my impression. Okay.
Right. So I do see your concern and I do hear you. And that's one of the difficulties that we are going through, because we specifically targeted technical interns because we we hypothesized that we can equate them with on and low skilled workers in Taiwan and Korea. And that's why. And maybe you see the discrepancies and you don't really see heterogeneity among migrant workers because we are still in the process of gathering data, and maybe that's why.
Yeah, the only problem is that, because technical intern was not considered migrant workers, they were not even integration, was not necessarily, catering to that group. Their visa is not conversible. So if you are talking about integration index, integration situations, then this group actually is not even considered by government as a group to be integrated. So this is actually the kind of a logical issue there. And so that's just one impression.
Okay, I think we can answer going back to your question after. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the experts from Japan pertaining to the Japanese data. Okay, now I would like to invite Professor Shin Eun-kyung. I now realize that why Professor Shin was assigned as a discussant by the organizing committee. That is young and smart. So she would be able to comment on 3 different papers, which are very interesting and but also very different. Okay, Professor Shin, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, and I appreciate this opportunity to learn about these 3 very different papers. As Professor Kim said, I'm not sure I'm not really the perfect person to deal with this challenge because these 3 papers are quite different from each other, and it covers a wide range of research questions. And I think immigrant itself is quite complex puzzle, and it covers various groups of people. Documented, undocumented, and they move to another country through different mediums like work, school, marriage, and so on and so forth. And this 3 presentation, particularly for this session, is very interesting. It gives us very interesting opportunity to think about it from the insider perspective, from the Dr. Lee's presentation, from the U.S. government perspective, or in our case, is the Korean government's perspective on the dual citizenship, and then looking at Hasin's paper looking at those North Korean immigrants in London and some other countries, and also Unja's paper looking at 3 different countries' immigrant policies. So let me do my job as best I can. I think we're going to go through one by one and raise some of the questions, and then we're going to wait until the end and you guys can respond to the comments. It's more like a question because I didn't really have the full paper. I just look at the slides. So maybe there's some of these questions you may have in the paper, then you can explain in further details. I think one of the questions from Dr. Lee's paper presentation was very, very interesting, especially I was one of those living in the States for 12 years and came back to South Korea last year. And somewhat surprising to see that 15% of South Korean population living abroad. I think that number was really shocking for me. And then, but at the same time, But at the same time, I think these 15% are not equally. This 15% of population living abroad, it doesn't really under the scope of citizenship later. You know, I was working as a student, I was like with a student visa and working visa, and like it really, the 15% population, it's by itself, it's not a matter of citizenship. So maybe it's like too much exaggeration of the situation. So I would like to know the exact number, like who are really dealing with the citizenship itself. And the second question, I think the dual citizenship has been alive for the last 10 years because enacted in 2010. And you briefly mentioned it from comparing the American, Korean American and Korean Chinese due to like the very recently, the Chinese has been included for the F4 and F2. And then you mentioned that still they are underrepresented in that act. So I want to know, like, is it really overly American populated policy or not? Because you mentioned one of the one of the bureaucrat you were citing from the comments. Okay, I can see the bureaucrats, the policymaker had that kind of intention of recruitment, but still I cannot really see that was really favoring Korean Americans. So I want to like see if you have any data that really can back up, for example, how many of them is actually Korean American who's taking advantage of this policy and compared to Chinese American or all others. And also, if that was the accusation to call it as a human resource control from the Korean government, then it's not only for Korean Americans, but also I think their educational background could be a key factor to answer or to support your arguments. So I'm just like curious about if you have any relevant data to back up in that regard. And oh yeah, so the last question was about when you're thinking about the citizenship itself, it's not just what we, it's like how the South Korean government looking at those population, but also the other, like US government policy. If it's easier for them to retain the dual citizenship from that end, it might influence the individual's decision-making in the process. So somewhat I feel like it is missing out. It's not only the US government, but also Chinese government's perspective as well. So I think if you can help us to understand or elaborate a little bit on that perspective. And I really enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much. And the Hwazin's paper, again, I mean, like, I'm really excited about this project. And when she told me about this project last year, I was really impressed by her courage to go to London to find this hidden population. So I think it was really impressive and that you were able to interview 141 North Korean refugees or immigrants in London. I was very interested in that especially today when your presentation comes right after the Chinese American, a Korean Chinese mention of like Dr. Lee's presentation, I thought about it just passing through my mind. Will you briefly mention in that your study, one of the store is not only Korean American, and then not only North Korean or South Korean dynamic, but also there is another like Korean Chinese there too, like Joseonjo.
Yes.
Yes, I want to hear a little bit about that structure itself. I mean, how they're functioning along the way. And also at the beautiful slides you showed, like the respondent-driven sampling method, then some of them actually have 5 individuals participate in the study, and then some are as a panel, they did not have any, but some only had like 1 person participate in the study and so on and so forth. So I was wondering, have you actually utilized the number of respondents that participate in this study? I think by itself, I mean, I know your questionnaire asking how many people you know and blah, 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 but actually how many people they could recruit to participate in this study can signal something, right? Compared to someone who actually recruited 5 people to participate in the study, who only can mobilize one another person to participate in the study. So I think that might be a very interesting variable if you want to explore a little bit. So that's just one thought, an idea. What else? And the finding itself, so you're arguing, the main conclusion was like, the more they have, the more they have the kin or families in North Korea, and they're less likely to integrate it in this North Korean community, right? And that, I think, as far as I understood, between a centrality amongst North Koreans, right? Then it's hard to understand. Like, I feel like for them who have more families or kins, relatives living in North Korea, I think for them, the North Koreans are more important, right? It's a little bit of the finding itself is a little bit counterintuitive in a sense. So can you explain, just as a storytelling, how can we make sense of that? Like, if they have more families or relatives in North Korea, I think they have more stronger identity in the North Korean, when you think about Korean Americans in the United States, right? So I just want to hear about that a little bit. And also it's just a quick question. It might be interesting to see, is there any high correlation? You saw the trust network and effect network. You can just simply check the correlation of the two, rather than simply just show there are some similarity. You can just simply run the correlation between the two networks, and it would be more like accurate to say, oh, they're like 70% correlation between two networks and so on and so forth. That's minor comments, I think. But as I said, I'm a huge fan of your research. Thank you so much for sharing your research. And lastly, Unje, as Professor Kim said, it was really a huge study by itself, and it's really surprising that it's even a part of a larger study. But I think because it is a comparative study, you probably expected to have this question, I think. Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. You're comparing immigrants in 3 different countries, but these 3 different countries have different histories in accepting the immigrants, workers, or immigrants through marriage. So I'm thinking probably the size, like how many people actually belongs to that group, is different amongst the 3 groups, and their immigrant history is different. So I'm just thinking, I think it was not stated clearly in the presentation. So I want to hear, is that really comparable, these 3 countries? Like, and also by saying that, comparing these 3 countries, like, what are we getting? Opposed to just looking at South Korean case, or I don't know, comparing different immigrants from different countries in one country, you know. So I'm just like curious about your thoughts behind it. And what else? Yeah, as of now, it was somewhat very intense work. I think it's still ongoing work. That's why it must have been a lot of work for you guys to come up with the various index score. But I'm curious about how you guys are actually making, because like, you know, Unja